Hello, it's Duncan Bolam at duncanbolam.com. This is more in my sort of series of video thinks and connecting the dots and things that might be arising as a result of coronavirus, COVID-19, the implications for career, purpose, threats to our identity, even all sorts of different things. So here I am. It's pretty much by practicing. It's the early days of these video thinks and out sort of thinking out loud to whoever might happen to be watching. So what I ought to do really in some way is try and give you some context as to why and how I feel I might have a valid opinion. And in a market of probably nobody who is an expert, there's clearly nobody who's an expert on this horrendous virus which is sweeping through the world. There's developments every day, breakthroughs, people are having to recognise that mistakes have been made and adapt and to prevail really. It's survival of the person who is most abreast of developments. So in that way, because so many of us are facing threats to our livelihood and our income, I think that's probably where I have my valid opinion. But why? So the making of Duncan Bolam was pretty, as I've said in other videos, other dots that I've collected, an unusual one really. I went to 5 different schools, started out in rural Northumberland, son of a doctor, father and a midwife mother, had a pretty remarkably charmed early childhood, and then it kind of came, there was a bit of a contrast occurred around about the age of 12. We upped sticks and moved to Washington Newtown, which you could say is the north of England's equivalent to Milton Keynes. Early to mid 1970s. I was born in 1963, so around about 1975-6 we moved. So long ago, can't remember exactly which dates. Anyway, ended up having gone to school with people from all around the world: Africa, Singapore, Hong Kong, parts of Africa like Nigeria, Uganda, I seem to remember. A noteworthy guy from Nigeria who was an African prince, and another guy from Afghanistan. So a typical, not quite old traditional Tom Brown school days preparatory school. I actually loved it, much of it, and ended up, without going into too much of the history, ended up in a comprehensive school. Lots of friends still in my life from those days, but suffice to say it was a contrast. To say the least, it was a contrast. I didn't get anything like the sort of qualifications that I needed to have to embark upon a career. From the age of 8, I'd wanted to be a plastic surgeon, and left school at about 16, 1980, with virtually no qualifications. I'm embarrassed to say what my qualification base is, but 1981, there was the left school in the early 1981, was working as an assistant golf professional at a large hotel in Washington, and decided I was going to go into the Royal Marines. I was good at sport. Went in the Royal Marine Commandos, June 1981, 22nd of June 1981. My serial number was P042305X, P42305 X-ray. That's branded, etched in my memory. And you weren't allowed to go out onshore for a drink during recruit training, the 6 months basic training for Royal Marine Commandos, unless you could remember your serial number. So that was very important. But here I am going off at a tangent, which is typical of me. Not really digressing, because I'm on the theme of what made me who I am, and what gives me this opinion. So anyway, I was invalided out of the Royal Marines with chronic stress fractures. My tibias and fibias were basically giving up underneath me with the the running long distance endurance physical runs with heavy equipment packs on our backs, and the boots, which weren't really designed for taking a 17-year-old 6'2" big lump of a kid cross country. That was a disaster. So I was invalided out after about 3 or 4 months, and I had to pick up the pieces. My father was disappointed, to say the least, because he was very proud of having a Royal Marine son, my GP dad, and that didn't really help that I felt I'd let him down, because he was a bit of an icon in my life, and an incredible hero to me in my early years, certainly. Then picked up the pieces, basically went to arts college. What on earth I did that for is anybody's guess. I suppose my next strength was I was good at art. What I wish I'd done was been better at it, better switched on and able to plot my career. Without going into the 1980s, I had 35 jobs in the first 32 years of my life. We might go into them in another film as to, because they obviously contributed greatly to who I am and my professional identity. Noticing I'm at 6 minutes and I was aiming to do a 5-minute film, so forgive me for overrunning my own deadline. Found myself having been up and down the M1, which is the main motorway from connecting London to the north of England, up and down that road a few times in my 20s, barely able to keep my feet beneath me, fight for survival, worked in the leisure industry, running squash clubs and fitness centres, launching aerobic studios, worked in retail management for organisations like Lacoste, bought myself a wonderful fashion franchise called Ton sur Ton, selling t-shirts and fitness gear in the early years of the leisure industry. What else did I do? Ran a factory, high frequency welding factory, as a production manager, which was an amazingly steep learning curve, but an amazing technology which taught me a lot. Which were a very interesting boss. Worked for a number of very interesting bosses. Ended up working as a golf and conferencing sales executive at a 5-star hotel in rural Northumberland, back in my origins, just literally a couple of miles away from where I was born and where I grew up. And then got the sack. And that job loss sparked me getting my first ever career guidance interview with a guy called Mike at Pathways Adult Career Development Centre in Sunderland. Sunderland having been in the midst of a pretty horrendous economic downturn. The shipyards were closing, the pits were closing, the coal industry was collapsing. Early to mid 1980s. Sorry, by this time I'm into the early to mid 1990s. Forgive my lapse. But anyway, ended up getting some career guidance, and paradoxically ended up getting pointed in the direction of career guidance as being the perfect fit for my career attributes. And he was right. It was an epiphany for me, an absolute transformation in my whole outlook on life, my direction in life, my personal identity. I did a postgraduate diploma at the University of Northumberland in career guidance. Very tough year for me. I'm not an academic. I was told such by somebody who marked one of my essays, that he said I spoke in a far too floral and journalistic style to be somebody at university. And I suppose he was right. You might agree. Anyway, part 1 was a 38-week full-time course, 1995 to 1996, and then through the most incredible collection of happenstance, I ended up working in Red Hill Career Centre in Surrey, moved down south again, went back down the M1 and the A1, whichever one you want to choose, and did a probationary year at Staines Career Centre following a short stint in Red Hill. Probationary year, part 2 of the qualification. Postgraduate year, if I'd failed one of my assessments, I would have failed the whole 2-year training. Took out thousands and thousands of pounds of worth of debt as a career development loan. Best debt I ever got into, I have to say, because it changed my life so much for the better. Worked with young people in schools, colleges, maybe a couple of university stints. Worked with adults in transition in the Staines Career Centre, which is no longer there. Switched myself on to being a self-assured, confident, kind of together person for the first time in my life. I felt like I was trading on my past and leveraging it to achieve some good in other people's futures, which was an amazing sort of feeling of contribution. That's what it was. So that's the early to mid 1990s, late 1990s. I was in a poverty trap, earning very, very low salary, comparatively speaking, as a qualified career guidance practitioner. Now into 97, saw an advert in the Sunday Times for outplacement consultants, self-employed, applied to Fair Place Consulting, got the job, worked on, at the time, the country's biggest ever outplacement project, which was the merger and acquisition of BP Amoco. Effectively, BP took over Amoco, and we closed down the headquarters in Hanger Lane Geriatry System in West London. The most amazing outplacement project. Allegedly, it was a blank cheque outplacement project, which is basically doing the redundancy counselling for all these people. Went on to work in organisations like British Oxygen, Hackney, London Borough of Hackney, Agravo Crop Sciences, Roche Pharmaceuticals, and a whole host of other amazing organisations. As a self-employed freelance outplacement consultant, worked for organisations like Right Management Consulting, Drake Beeman Moran, TDA. The list goes on. It's on my LinkedIn profile if you want to have a closer look. Not all 35 jobs are on there, I hasten to add. So the interim 20 years, it's now the 23rd of March 2020. I've been doing this work since December 1997. I've evolved into an executive coach, career coach, and my special subject is purpose coaching. I believe I have uncovered a formula to help people turn on to their purpose in life. And that's really important. And why is because 90% of the people I meet are in the wrong job, or out of work completely, or are not engaged at all in their work. And in terms of the transaction that takes place on pay, wages and salary, that's got enormous bearing for both the employee and the employer, the freelancer and the payer of the contract. And that was before we got to coronavirus and COVID-19. Now we are in the midst of this global pandemic. The threat to livelihood has never been greater in history. And that's why I'm getting aerated and pretty agitated. And, I've overshot my deadline in this video alone by the best part of 8 minutes, because this is something I'm deeply passionate about. And I want to help. I want to make a contribution. I really care that there are so many people losing their jobs. And in other of my short films and shorter films, he said tongue-in-cheek, I am going to say something about the billionaire economy and a little bit more about where I see the shift towards a greater cooperation and a greater fairness in the labour market, because the labour market lacks fairness to the most unbelievable extent. And I think that's, to a large extent, why we are where we are. Obviously can't blame that for this virus. But in terms of the way that people are losing their jobs at this time, a sieve, shedding people, shedding payroll, reducing the company or the organisation's overheads is going to help any of society at this time. There's got to be a better way. And these films are about a better way. Building a great big conversation on how we can help each other, how we are all able to make a contribution. Because at the end of the day, holistic well-being, socio-economic well-being, global peace, recovery, The other side is going to be about people making a contribution, a valid contribution, on the basis of what they've got in here, and what they've got in here, and what they want to do, and what they're best at doing. So thanks for listening. 15 minutes, overshot my runway by 10 minutes. Sorry about that. Hopefully it's been worth your while, and you can look forward to having another conversation, and we can get a big conversation going on this subject. Thanks very much.